Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to our webinar, which is Smart Metering is Coming. And wish you all a happy St. Patrick's Day. And we'd like to get started. I hope you enjoy this. First, this webinar is recorded, and we choose as an organization to retain and distribute the video. We try to educate the public about this, and that would include anything like the chat transcript. And so you're consenting to participate in this by continuing with the webinar. If you're not interested in that, you could um, choose to leave, but we hope you stay. And we will get started. Here are the basics. We've got a big crowd today, and a lot of people are in attendance at the moment. And then we've got a lot more who have registered who will be looking forward to the recording and the slides. You'll be muted throughout the webinar. We will answer questions at the end of the presentation. And if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that there's a Q&A function there. That's where you should put your questions, not in the chat. And we'll send you the recording and the slides and maybe some other information if we think of it within a couple of days. If you would like to use closed captions, click CC at the bottom of your screen. Next slide. So here we are. We are the Green Energy Consumers Alliance. We are green 365 days a year, not just on St. Patrick's Day. But here we are. This is a mix. This photograph is a mix of board and staff from one of our fall meetings. And we are a nonprofit organization based in Cambridge, Massachusetts now, and Providence, Rhode Island, with a mission to empower consumers and communities to speed a just transition to a zero carbon world. Next slide, please. Today, your speakers would be me. I'm Larry Cretion. I'm the executive director, but also Anna Vanderspeck, who's our electrical vehicle program director and who does a lot of other things with respect to green energy advocacy and grid modernization, and Tina Munter, who is our Rhode Island policy advocate. Also supporting us is Becca Miller, who is off screen. We appreciate her help. Today's agenda, we're going to talk about what are smart meters, how are they getting deployed across the two states that we work in, Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and what will they enable. So first section is what are smart meters, and I will turn it over to Anna Vanderspeck.
Thanks, Larry. We will go over what smart meters are in just a moment, but first we are going to make this a little interactive with a poll. So I have just launched a poll with just 2 questions. We'd like to get a sense of what the distribution is of people on the webinar in terms of what your electric utility is, and then also get a sense of who's actually had a smart meter installed yet. And I see people are responding. I'm going to just stall for another minute because the number keeps going up. Right now, it looks like we've got a lot of Eversource customers, fair number of National Grid, a little bit fewer of Rhode Island Energy, and then a couple of folks in municipal light plants. Let me see. Okay, I think the responses have slowed down, so I'll end the poll and share the results. So looks like 60% of you are Eversource electric customers, a quarter are National Grid, 11% Rhode Island Energy, and then 3% are municipal light plants. Nobody is not sure about their electric utility, so congratulations, because that can be confusing sometimes, quite honestly. And then 3/4 of you have not had your smart meters installed. Looks like 14% have, and then some folks aren't sure, which is very fair because it's a pretty smooth process. So that is just useful for us to keep in mind as we keep going through these slides. So what are smart meters? Smart meters are essentially advanced digital meters that monitor your electricity use with a lot of more granularity than the analog meters that most of us have right now. So these new digital smart meters look pretty similar to old analog meters. There's a picture on the right from one of National Grid's resources on this topic. But the key is that they can report on your electricity use in 15-minute intervals instead of on a daily or monthly basis. Specifically, when we're talking about smart meters, we're talking both about different hardware that is installed at your home, but also really sophisticated software that comes along with it that enables a lot more insight into your electricity use, and also new programs or rates that we'll talk about later. The hardware itself should last 15 to 20 years, but because these are digital and smart, they can be updated with software over time. So there might be things or there might be capabilities that we don't launch right away with these smart meters that we can add on over time because of software updates. Our region is actually pretty behind the rest of the country in terms of smart meter deployment. Smart meters have been around since 2006, and at this point, more than 3/4 of the electric meters in the US are smart meters. New England or Massachusetts and Rhode Island, for whatever reason, are a little bit behind the curve there, but hopefully catching up. In terms of how they actually communicate, smart meters don't use your Wi-Fi or internet connection. They use radio frequency to communicate with devices that are being installed on distribution poles and wires. So your smart meter communicates to these devices on the distribution grid near you, and then those devices communicate back to the electric utility. Eversource on their website about smart meters has a nice catalog of photos of what these devices look like. So they all have different names. There's relays, access points, socket access points, antennas. I quite honestly don't know the difference between what each of these things does, but the point is that they're gathering data from your smart meter and sending it back to the utility. And you might increasingly see things like this on the distribution poles and wires near you. How are they getting deployed across Massachusetts and Rhode Island? The answer is gradually. So in Massachusetts, many commercial customers already have smart meters, but we're really focusing on residential customers today. When you will get a smart meter depends on where you live, both in terms of what your electric utility is and where you are in the sort of deployment timeline, and we'll go through that by electric utility. In Massachusetts, the Department of Public Utilities approved the deployment plans of National Grid and Eversource in 2023. Deployment began in 2025 and will be done by 2028. And it, again, depends on sort of where you are in the queue for that. We're focusing on National Grid and Eversource because they serve the vast majority of customers in Massachusetts, but obviously they are not the only utilities. The sort of latest by utility is that Eversource, which has 1.4 million residential customers, is moving west to east and has so far installed 100,000 meters. According to their website, right now they're working on Framingham, Natick, Plymouth, Mattapan, and Alston-Brighton. National Grid also has about 1.4 million residential customers. They're in process. We'll see a map shortly about where they are. Unitil, which serves just a couple of communities, just 31,000 residential customers. The latest update we could find on them was from July of 2025, and at that point they'd replaced 62% of the meters. But then we know that lots of folks across Massachusetts and Rhode Island are served by municipal light plants. And a lot of those already have smart meters, so it really depends on where your municipal light plant is in the deployment phase. But because there's 53 of them across Massachusetts, we don't have a list ready, but if you live in an MLP, you should be able to find that information on your utility's website. This is a map that National Grid provided to the Department of Energy Resources, which has an electric rates task force. And it's from last summer, and it's a little busy, but it does show the plan for deployment in National Grid territory. So I will do my best to explain this very busy map. So the map is first broken out into service territories. So that's the base color of the map. You've got Western Massachusetts, Central Massachusetts, Southeast, South Shore, North Shore, and Merrimack Valley. And then you've got arrows, and those arrows correspond to calendar years. So in calendar year 24 and 25, you can see the areas that are covered in the yellow arrows had smart meters deployed. So that's the South Shore, the southern half of Central Mass, and sort of the southeastern part of Western Mass. Those places should already have received smart meters. Year 2 of deployment is calendar year 2026, which is what we're in right now. And you can see that they're starting in the southeast of Massachusetts and kind of working northwest up into Central Mass, and also working on the Merrimack Valley, sort of starting in the northeast and working southwest. And then the final year of deployment is calendar year 2027, when they'll do the rest of Western Mass and the North Shore. So depending on where you live, you can kind of have a general estimate of when you might expect to get a smart meter. And again, they're not just deploying the smart meters at your homes, they're also deploying these devices, which National Grid refers to as field area network or FAN devices. But those are the things on the distribution poles and wires that you will see popping up in your community around the same time that you start getting your smart meters. This slide is a little outdated now. Again, it's from July of last year, but at that time they had installed 200,000 AMI or advanced meters in Brockton, Easton, Northeastern, Randolph, Southeastern, and Worcester. We know they've done more than that because Larry lives on the South Shore and he has a smart meter, which we'll see in a couple of slides. So definitely more than just those communities have been covered so far. And as you'll see in the bottom right, the utilities, not just National Grid, but both of them have pretty robust communications plans to make sure that you're not surprised when you get a smart meter. So we'll talk about how you find out a little bit more, but they've also got more information on this slide. And again, we'll share these slides. Eversource doesn't have a map the same way, but they have this sort of Gantt chart. There's a lot going on this chart, but I want to draw your attention to the deployment and operations section. So you can see that Eversource started with network deployment, which is those things on the distribution poles and wires at the beginning of 2025, and we'll be doing that through the first half of 2026. But the actual meter deployment is started in the second half of 2025 and will go through the end of 2027. I will now turn it to Tina, our Rhode Island resident, to talk about Rhode Island.
Thank you, Anna. So Rhode Island is on a slightly different schedule with AMF deployment as compared to Massachusetts. Our Public Utilities Commission, or PUC, approved Rhode Island Energy's AMF plan in 2023, and meter deployment has begun and should conclude by the end of 2026. The image on the right of the screen shows a GIS map of meter check and meter deployment throughout the state. So what we can see from this chart or this map is that the entirety of Rhode Island either has their meter exchanges complete or in some stage of progress, which is usually a technician coming to check the meter outside your house and make sure that it can be exchanged with the new smart meter. If you're in the southern part of the state, in the purple section, you most likely have your new meter already installed unless you have opted out of the process. The northern part of the state is still going through meter checks and then meter exchanges, but as I had said earlier, that should conclude around the end of this year. Next slide, please. So in terms of the installation process, it should be relatively seamless. Your utility will reach out to you in advance of the meter checks and meter replacement by email, paper mail, and/or phone calls. And the installation process only takes a couple of minutes, typically 15 minutes or less, but it does require a brief interruption of your power as the technician takes off your old meter and then installs the new one. In Rhode Island, our utility, Rhode Island Energy, had partnered with the vendor Grid One to install these advanced meters. So those are the trucks and the branding that you might see in your neighborhood during installation. However, you are not required to be at home during installation unless your meter is located inside. And then after installation, the technician will leave a note to let you know that the work has been completed and that your new meter is installed and functional. Now, if you have solar on your roof, you will still receive a new smart meter. But if you have a net metering system, that may also need to be upgraded when your new standard meter is installed. And in Rhode Island, if you have solar and are enrolled in the Renewable Energy Growth or Regrowth program, your compensation rate that you locked into will not change with the AMF transition. Now, when we talk about what these new meters will enable, I'll leave that to Larry.
Thank you, Tina. So we're going to go into the whys of why do we have these advanced meters coming across both states. And so we'll get the main issue is to have two-way information going. Well, we benefit as consumers from seeing the information, but the utility can see the information, and that should create uh, a more resilient grid, a grid that's cheaper to operate, that has benefits that we haven't seen before. So you'll be able to, once your advanced meter is set up, you'll be able to monitor your usage through an online portal from your utility. It might be, you might want to use an app that they'll set up for you. Sense is a company that's been hired by the utilities to do the software behind the advanced meters. And there's also, you'll be able to use the online portal set up on your computer, your laptop or your desktop, and get information. The third-party apps such as Sense will enable you to see, how some appliances are working. The apps that are available right now are just sort of beginning. I think you'll see more enhancements. Right now, it's the deployment phase of the actual infrastructure, so be patient with respect to that. Um, Ultimately, what you might get once the meters are installed is the utility might be able to send you an alert. Maybe if you, it depends how you opt for that, you might get an email or a text alert saying that it's July 17th. We expect the temperature to reach 100 degrees with humidity. Please do what you can to reduce some of your electricity usage. We have a program called Shave the Peak that some of you might know about, but this kind of advanced metering infrastructure will enable utilities to do more with that. And they'll be able to do some analytics on your usage over time and maybe give you tips on how you can reduce your energy bill. Next. And what's really cool about these devices that they'll be integrated with things like smart thermostats. And really, this is the Internet of Things, as some people talk about, but we'll be able to integrate the advanced metering infrastructure with your electric car, your heat pump water heaters, and any other devices in the home. And you'll be able to see your bill projections through a billing period based upon your most recent usage. So it'll be pretty dynamic. You'll be able to easily compare bills over time. Next slide, please. So I've had my smart meter for a couple of months, and it's kind of fun to look at. So I've looked at the last few days for you. So if you notice, the scale on the left-hand side changes each day based upon what's happening in the home. And so the weather's been fairly mild. And just the other day on March 10th, it was a nice warm day. So we have heat pumps and heat pump water heaters and induction stove and all that. But the usage was pretty mild, low for most of the day. But then as we hit the midnight hour, we started to we plug in our car, we schedule it to be fully charged by 6 a.m. the next day. And I have an Equinox EV that was charging, and what that was doing was it backed into the hours. So it wanted to make sure I was fully charged at 6 a.m. I actually set it to be charged to 80%. And so it started up at about 3 a.m. And that's why you see a bit of a spike in usage for that period of time. That's off peak. And then, as you can see, after it was charged, we got back settled into a pattern where it wasn't quite as warm as the previous day. We ran the heat pumps a bit. We had them set up to come on at 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. And we made some coffee and we had our breakfast. So you see a little blip there, and then it calmed down again. The point of showing you this slide is that the the easiest thing in the world to schedule when you want to use it is an electric car. But you could also do that with uh, your laundry and with your dishes or something like that. And so where we're going with this is the advanced metering infrastructure is going to sort of facilitate the development of perhaps time of use pricing, which is something we advocate for, which is it would essentially incentivize a consumer to use their power off peak. So between 3 a.m. and 6 p.m. right now, these days, it's the electricity on the wholesale market's cheaper. And particularly once we get offshore wind going, that's usually a really good time to be consuming offshore wind power. So that was that day. Then we kept going, and if you can see, we were looking at a situation where the usage coming from the evening, we settled into a period of time where um, we didn't have to do any EV charging. So this is basically all about heat pump consumption. And you can see that there's a trough there, and that's when we were sleeping. We had set the thermostats down to 60 degrees, and so the heat pumps were less active. Um, and so usually it'll be interesting to see how many people want to work with their heat pump when we get to time of use pricing, which will take a while, as we'll get into in a bit. And then the heat pumps came on again at around 6 a.m. And you can see they kind of cycle on and off in order to maintain a comfortable temperature um, in the day. And around 5:30 or 6, we were cooking with our induction stove. So you can see the variation throughout the day. Um, and that's that's one of the functionalities that you get from the smart meter. And that brings us through March 12th. Then now here's another example. Um, as you can see, it goes up again, largely due to the heat pumps were keeping us nice and cozy in the morning. And that was that we once again set them down to 60 degrees for the overnight. Still no EV charging. Now here's an interesting one. This spike, if you will, it's not because we were charging our EVs. The EVs were still had a high level of charge. We don't plug them in every night, but we wanted to have the temperature at roughly 70 degrees when we woke up. It was a little bit chilly that evening, evidently, and so we got that. The heat pumps went on then, but then as the temperature warmed up, we throughout the day, it was lower energy consumption and still no EV charging. So you can see all that. If there was some incentive to uh, cut back on usage, maybe take advantage of it. But you want to be warm. It's when you wake up in the morning, and that still is not considered usually by any stretch a peak period. Uh, Certainly in our electricity grid right now in New England, this time of year. Maybe 10 years from now, when heat pumps are more prevalent, that will become an issue, but we're going to deal with that as time goes on. And then in the upper right, I just thought it would be interesting to see that our usage throughout the day was pretty low because it was, not a very cold day. We weren't charging EVs, but it's kind of cool that you could see that it could tell when we were cooking. We were using the induction stove, and we were using a toaster oven, and we moved some food from the induction stove over to the toaster oven. We were cooking fish, and we wanted to do it that way. So you can see the little bit of a blip up and then a little bit of a blip down before it went down back to that lower level. So the advanced meters are pretty cool in my estimation. So here now we just keep going over the weekend. The weekend is always an off-peak period. And so this is a great time to charge an electric car if you have it. It was a warm day, so there wasn't much activity going with respect to the heat pumps, but we needed to charge the EV a bit because we had a road trip Saturday evening. And so we set the car to be fully charged by 6 a.m. And as you can see, that's where most of the consumption was in that period. That was pretty much all EV. And then Sunday morning, it was pretty warm. And so the usage went substantially down. Then you move to the far right of the day. So we have another EV that we were charging, my daughter's Volt. And so it doesn't draw as many kilowatts as the Equinox. So you can see that it doesn't reach quite as high on the scale. And so we were charging it for a little bit in the afternoon, and then we took a break. We had to go shopping, and that's where the usage went down. Then we brought it back, and we wanted to get the volt back up to its full charge, and that is why you see a little bit of a blip up for the rest of the afternoon. So that's all off-peak charging, and so one of the things that we rant about a lot is that the whole system should better incentivize people to use electricity off-peak. So if now that we've got the cars fully charged by Sunday afternoon, we won't need to be charging them on Monday, Tuesday, and actually, at the rate we drive, probably won't need to really charge them up until maybe Thursday or Friday. Next slide. Now I'll turn it over to Tina, who will describe her experience with a smart meter.
Yeah, so this graph shows one day, Sunday, March 8th, of my electricity usage from Rhode Island Energy. And during this day, it was a Sunday. I was out of the house for most of the day because I was out of town and there was nobody else in my house either. So you can see that the usage for most of the day is quite low. However, once I returned home in the later afternoon, around 5 o'clock, I was doing laundry, I was cooking, I was turning my lights, probably all of them on, vacuuming, doing things like that. And so with all of my electric appliances on, I was using much more electricity as compared to my consumption in the rest of the day. Now, while I don't have an electric vehicle, so there's not as much of an impact in terms of Larry's usage, you can see that my usage does fluctuate with things like running my dryer, cooking, using my stove, because I also have an induction stove and cooktop. But later in the evening, my consumption declines as I am finally turning lights off and getting ready to go to bed. Similar to the process that Larry had described from Massachusetts, if you already have your smart meter installed, you can also see your own consumption data by logging into your online Rhode Island Energy portal and looking for a link that should say, view my consumption data, which should be right under your monthly billing summary. And so if you have your smart meter, you can also look at your data in either this level of granularity or across other time periods. So I was looking at just one day, but you can also look at usage over a couple days at a time, over a week, a 2-week period, but you can also look at it in aggregate and compare month-to-month usage over time. You can also change how you look at the data. So on this graph, I'm just looking at it in terms of my kilowatt hour consumption, but you can also look at the cost per billing period of your electricity usage, not just that kilowatt hour usage. And what I really like about this portal is that I can also track the temperature throughout the day on the same chart that I'm looking at my usage. So you can also start to pull out, if it's colder in the morning, are you using more energy? And as it warms up over the day, are you using less over time? Things like that. Additionally, in this online portal, you can set up email alerts if that's something you're interested in to get updates on your weekly electricity usage, or even set up an alert if your usage goes over a certain threshold, which you can set yourself. So a lot of these tools really help you as a resident or a homeowner understand electricity usage and what your appliances are using, even though Rhode Island doesn't yet have an app associated with our smart meters. We do have this portal. So I feel like these meters definitely enable a lot of knowledge for residents into how much electricity they're using, when they're using it, or even what it'll look like if you turn on either your dishwasher and your laundry machines, or just one or the other at a time, and what that does to your consumption.
I'll jump in again for the next slide. We don't actually have anybody's actual live data from Eversource, but Eversource does provide some, or did provide some screenshots of what you might see, again, to that electric rates task force in Massachusetts. So this is a sample graph of what you might see if you're an Eversource customer, which is really very similar to what Tina just showed from Rhode Island Energy, where you can see your usage. In this case, they're showing you the cost rather than the number of kilowatt hours, but you can see that you could toggle to energy use at the top and see kilowatt hours instead. But you can watch how that changes along with the temperature. They also offered some screenshots like this, where you can see your electricity use by day and see the costs, and also see get updates about, like, when are you using the most electricity? What are your trends? Are you going up or down for whatever reason? And it'll just allow a lot more insight. I think this bill forecast feature is also really powerful, because right now, the way it is, if you have an analog meter, you don't know what your bill is until you get it. And we know that with heating and also cooling in the summer, your bill can vary a lot, and that unpredictability is can be difficult to manage. So having these smart meters keeping track of your electricity throughout the month, you'll be able to get bill forecasts and projections of what your bill might be. And what Eversource is showing in this screenshot is that they'll be able to compare that to your previous year, and also connect you with resources to help lower your bill. So there's really a lot of cool capability that could be unlocked, or will be unlocked with this, just with this sort of portal from the utility. But those third-party apps might even be smart enough to say things like, your air conditioner is really inefficient. Like, we can tell based on the temperature and how much energy you're using that, like, this is a really big energy hog. Here's an incentive, or here's information about more efficient air conditioners, or whatever it is, fridges, whatever it is, to lower your bills. And I think that that level of insight will mean that if you have any amount of money that you want to put towards energy efficiency upgrades, that you can do the ones that will get you the biggest bang for your buck in terms of bill reductions. So that's all very exciting. Everything we've talked about so far has been benefits for you, the consumer, but there are also benefits more broadly. If we are looking at the utility level, this real-time information will help the utilities run the grid more efficiently and more effectively. So these smart meters will allow utilities to monitor real-time energy use and find problems and respond faster to power outages or failing electrical equipment. Right now, the utility doesn't really know where there is a power outage unless you call them and tell them, hey, I've lost power. With these smart meters, they will be able to know and respond much more quickly. There's also, because all of this is smart and digital, there's some level of remote servicing that the utility will be able to do if they notice that any particular piece of electrical equipment is failing. All of this just means fewer and shorter power outages. And as we're all facing more frequent and more intense storms as a result of climate change, this is really important, and a definite huge benefit for this smart meter rollout. Larry's talked a couple times now about time of use rates or managed charging programs. Those are all under the bucket of load management, which we'll take a moment to explain. So the hours when demand for electricity is highest, which are often referred to as peak times, are disproportionately polluting and expensive. It's something like 1% of the hours in the year are responsible for 10% of the costs of maintaining the grid. The numbers might be slightly wrong on that. I'll find the right numbers for you, but the point is that both on a big scale, like over the course of the year, those days when we are all turning our AC on because it's the third day of a heat wave, those are the days that are disproportionately polluting, because we're turning on sort of the old power plants that we don't use the rest of the year. And they're also disproportionately expensive because we have to build out our grid infrastructure to deliver energy at those peak moments, but the rest of the year don't need to use all that infrastructure. So from a grid or societal perspective, we really want to minimize the amount of electricity being used in those peak times, both on a annual basis, but also during the day. So you saw what is called a load curve for both Tina and Larry, and can see that when everybody comes home and plugs in their car or uses their induction stove or does their laundry, demand increases in the late afternoon, for example. The more that we can sort of smooth that out and keep the peaks and the troughs minimal, the lower the costs are for everybody. So societally, we really want to shift whatever load we can to those off-peak periods. And there's a lot of different ways of doing that, but one way that is enabled by smart meters specifically is time varying rates. Sometimes these are also referred to as time of use rates, where right now when you pay your electric bill, you're paying the same amount per kilowatt hour regardless of when you use that kilowatt hour. But with smart meters, we can say, okay, if you're using electricity on peak, it's this price. And if you're using electricity off peak, it's this price. And so the idea is that the off-peak rate would be lower, both to incentivize whatever load is shiftable to move into those off-peak periods, but also to reflect the fact that it is cheaper to generate and deliver that electricity during those off-peak times. So it's only fair that you, the end-use consumer, see that differential. An increasing number of smart appliances allow you to shift your energy use without disrupting your life. An electric vehicle is a great example of this. As Larry said, you just want the car 80% charged at 6 a.m., but you don't really care if it's charging at 5 a.m. or at 10 p.m., as long as it's ready for you to go. There are other examples of appliances or devices that you can tell, I want this done at this time, but I don't care when you use it. So this is true for like electric water heaters, but it's also increasingly true for dishwashers and laundry machines and things like that. And all of those could be sort of hooked in this world once we've got smart meters. I really want to stress that reducing peak load reduces costs for everyone, not just the person who's benefiting from a lower off-peak rate. We all benefit if we can reduce those peaks because that reduces system costs for everyone. Our two states are definitely in different places when it comes to time varying rates or time of use rates. Massachusetts is definitely considering time varying rates. There's been a lot of work done by our Department of Energy Resources and other state agencies on this topic, sort of thinking through what the approach should be once we have these smart meters in place. Rhode Island is not really having a holistic conversation about this at this point. This is a slide with a lot of acronyms on it, but it comes from the Grid Modernization Advisory Council in Massachusetts. This is a body that was set up by a law a couple of years ago that is intended to oversee the grid modernization process of our investor-owned utilities. And this is a slide from a little while ago that shows sort of the timeline of how the deployment of these smart meters can eventually result in time varying rates. So I'm gonna go from left to right. In 2025, you see the IRWG, that's the Interagency Rates Working Group. The Department of Energy Resources basically brought together a lot of stakeholders and did a lot of thinking about what is the appropriate way to charge for electricity in the short term before we have smart meters, but in the long term also after we have smart meters. What are best practices? How do we want to allocate costs and benefits? And that work was expected to result in a proceeding at the Department of Public Utilities sometime between 2025 and 2026. Didn't quite work out that way. What instead happened is that the Interagency Rates Working Group sort of morphed into or led into an electric rates task force. And that task force issued a draft straw proposal a couple of months ago. That's something we commented on. And where we are right now is we're waiting for the Department of Energy Resources to release a final proposal from this electric rates task force. And then in 2026, that will likely kick off a proceeding at the Department of Public Utilities. The key point, though, is that by 2028, all of those advanced meters should be in place. Some of the utilities will be done sooner rather than later, but by 2028, they should all be done, which means that after 2028, at some point, we'll see those time varying rates come through. I think in Massachusetts, it's really clear from the Department of Energy Resources that time of use rates make a lot of sense and will be part of this picture. But exactly what the rates will be or what the time periods will be or how this will all be managed, that's going to be determined in this DPU proceeding that is still to come. Related to this idea of load management is the idea of aggregating distributed energy resources, or DERs. When I talk about distributed energy resources, I mean things that can feed energy back onto the grid, but are not one central power plant, but distributed and smaller. So key examples of this are solar, home batteries, and increasingly electric vehicles that can discharge energy back to the grid. With the greater level of insight that smart meters will allow the utilities to have on the grid, they'll be able to pinpoint more specifically where the grid is congested and where we want to target those load management programs to improve reliability or avoid future costly infrastructure buildouts. So if there's one area of the grid that is super congested, it might be worth really targeting that area to make sure that any EVs that are there are charging off peak, or that the batteries that are there are coordinated in terms of when they're discharging or charging from the grid. And that kind of program is enabled by smart meter deployment. But it's not just utilities necessarily that will run these load management programs. Third-party companies could aggregate distributed energy resources like solar, batteries, and EVs to participate in wholesale markets and really compete with fossil fuel generation, which is obviously Green Energy Consumers Alliance, something that we're really excited about. But will also mean that customers will have choice about what kinds of programs to participate in. The details of all of this will all be settled in the next couple of years, but the point is that the smart meters enable all of this, and there's a lot of potential in programs like this to reduce costs for everybody, but also emissions. In sum, Larry, did you want this slide or is it me? I can't remember. I'll just keep going. In sum, smart meters are coming. They will help with both reducing costs and emissions, and you should be excited. We have tons of questions I have seen come through while I've been presenting, but Larry, I'll turn it over to you and then we'll move on to Q&A.
Yes, we'll start Q&A in about 2 seconds. I just wanted to put in a commercial. It's my job as the executive director to make sure we're well financed. We try to do a lot at Green Energy Consumers Alliance, both in terms of policy advocacy and programs and education like today. And this month, the month of March, we have a generous donor who's offering to match any donation that you might want to provide to us. And so please give if you can. Go to our website. You can use the QR code right there as well, and we would greatly appreciate it. We have an amazing staff, and I want to keep them. So with that, I think now we'll go to the Q&A. Upcoming events. We have a lot of events. If you go to our events page, you'll see that we have a bunch from March through June, but we end up adding as well. This won't be the last you'll see between now and June 10th. So go to our events page. We'd love to see you at some of these events. Some are online and some are out there we're going to be in the woods in Whitman River Hydro Tour, for example. We're going to be at various places. We'll be at the City of Providence looking at wind turbines. So we'd love to see you if you can. Now I think we're going to Q&A. I'm going to go through the questions and refer some questions to Anna and to Tina. Holly asked, will managed charging play nicely with smart metering? And Anna, do you want to take that one, please?
$1 million question. So yes, it should, because electric vehicles, as Larry's mentioned, are one of the most easily shifted loads, and they're also a pretty big load, as we've seen from those graphs. One of the points that we've been actually making in our advocacy work is that we need a vision for how these pieces will play together in the coming years. And quite honestly, I think the next year or two will be really critical in answering your question with more detail. Right now, the utilities, National Grid, Eversource, Unitil, and some of the MLPs have managed charging programs. Rhode Island also has an EV demand response program, which is sort of a similar idea. Those programs don't use meter data because not everybody has a smart meter. Instead, they use data from the charger or the vehicle's telematics. That works for right now for those managed charging programs, but smart meters are much more like granular and specific and accurate with the data that they're reporting. So the idea is once we shift to smart meters, the vision that Massachusetts has put forward so far, and again, the conversation might change, is that we'll have time of use rates for the whole home's electricity usage, but then maybe have specific programs for EVs, either specific outreach programs or specific programs that kind of layer on top of those time of use rates if you are in a particularly congested part of the grid. So from a policy perspective, definitely an active conversation how that all works. From a I have an EV and I'm getting a smart meter perspective, for the next couple of years, you've got your managed charging program, and we'll learn more once we know with more detail, time varying rates, time of use rates, how that's all going to go. We'll be able to answer that question better in terms of how it would impact you in a couple of years.
Thank you, Anna. A couple questions. Somebody asked about how is this deployment being paid for? Is it going to affect our bills? And the reality is we have essentially paid for the deployment so far, and it's going to continue as the cost of the deployment happens. Our analysis is that it's been a pretty small part of the issue that we've seen in the last couple of years with electricity rates going up. There are other reasons that would be much larger than the deployment of these advanced meters. There was a rigorous process to get to this point. Believe it or not, Massachusetts and Rhode Island are among the last states in the country to have advanced meters with that of the type that we just described. And so most of the country has it. A lot of the states might have gone too soon, and they're not really realizing the benefits that you can now get because the technology today is more advanced than it was, say, in 2006. So yes, we are paying for them, but we're pretty convinced as a pro-consumer organization that the DPU in Massachusetts and the Rhode Island PUC will use these meters and require the utilities to use them in a way that ends up saving money over time. There are a number of questions that had to do with, will you be notified before the meters are installed? Yes. Now means you're going to need to check your email or read your monthly bills as they come in if you still get them by paper. And I think I was notified several times that the meters were coming relatively soon, and then they finally came. I forget. I think they knocked on my door the day they were here, but they were in and out in just a few minutes, and it didn't affect us at the home at all. So some of you have questions about how it's going to affect. You might have more than one meter in your house, as somebody pointed out. Will you get 2 meters? Honestly, I don't know that question. When you get your notice that it's coming, you might want to give the utility a call. In all cases, National Grid, Eversource, Rhode Island Energy, if you go to their website, you probably have an online account. They will have pages there about the deployment of the advanced meters, along with frequently asked questions. So then Karen's asking about, are the advanced meters hackable? Meaning, can somebody go in and hack them and sort of get the data that's available from the meters? And our information is that's not to be expected to be a problem. I know that the DPU and the PUC were quite concerned about that. To be honest with you, we're not experts on that particular question. And there was a lot of concerns. It goes so far as access to the data is going to be a point of contention. There are communities that have municipal aggregation want to have some access to the data. or their suppliers do so that they can work with it and maybe provide time varying rates. But like that's a serious issue that the lawyers are fighting over and all that. Um, and some of you have asked questions about how it interacts with solar. Um, what I'm seeing here is I think we need to clarify that a bit. So Anna, Tina, and I will do some more research on how it interacts, the advanced meter interacts with the solar and the net metering. I do know that my brother in Weymouth, who's a National Grid customer, has solar. He's been net metering, and he recently, like I did, he recently got his um, uh, smart meter, and it's functioning fine. And so when he sees his bill, it's net of his solar usage. He has a meter. He's able to also monitor his solar production as well. So that's all working well. The one minor glitch is right now he's not able to see it on a smartphone app because of the solar and the advanced meters. And here's another point. Other people have asked, how quickly will we have time varying rates after the meters are installed? And it's going to take a while. I'm not a patient person, but Anna, do you want to go through that timeline a little bit more about, when would we expect to be able to have time varying rates?
So the utility deployment of smart meters should be done by 2028, really the end of 2027. What the utilities have said in previous dockets is that they would like a full year of those smart meters being deployed with the rates as we have them now before any time varying rates or time of use rates get launched. But no decision has been made on that front. So I would say I wouldn't expect them before the end of 2028. But that is what will be discussed in this forthcoming proceeding at the Department of Public Utilities. And I think, Tina, correct me if I'm wrong, but in Rhode Island, we just don't know.
Yeah, so Rhode Island Energy is continuing to deploy, so do the meter exchanges through the end of 2026. But as of right now, there isn't any proceeding or, tentative schedule for developing time varying or time of use rates by Rhode Island Energy. Of course, that might change. We would love to see it, start popping up soon so that people can begin thinking about, what they'd like to be enabled by these new smart meters. But Anna is correct. As of right now, we haven't heard anything.
Very good. So some other questions. If your community is buried electrical wires, where will the fans go? Fans is the acronym for what, Anna?
I don't remember what the letters stand for, but it's the things that on the pictures from Eversource we saw installed on distribution poles and wires.
Field area networks. It just came to me.
There we go.
And that's a good question, Jane. We don't know the answer to that. I'm sure that that's a consideration that the utilities are working on. Somebody asked, because Anna and I talked quite a bit about time varying rates and peak and off peak. How do you know when the off peak time is? Well, again, right now we generally don't have time varying rates. The utilities do have some programs for encouraging off peak EV charging. Typically, Anna, can you be more precise as to where that is right now?
So right now for the off-peak charging rebate program that National Grid has and the Eversource managed charging program that they just launched last week, off-peak, if I remember correctly, is between 9 p.m. and 1 p.m. So on-peak is anything between 1 p.m. and 8 p.m. or 1 p.m. and 9 p.m. That's right now. That what is determined to be on-peak and off-peak will change over time, but right now, until we get better data and better insight into all of this, off-peak is basically just overnight and in the early morning.
Yep. So another question, somebody, heard us talking about cooking, and they asked if, with induction stoves, is what uses more energy, a cooktop or an oven? And honestly, neither one, there's not a big difference in terms of the energy consumption, whether it's the induction stovetop or the induction oven, or say an electric toaster oven. The key point we would make here is why we're excited about electrification, and particularly in this application, is it allows us to get rid of a gas stove. And so we want to burn less gas. We want to use more clean energy, and that's better for indoor air quality. So um, uh, your cooking is always going to be a very small part of your energy bill per year. Um, then uh, Lauren asked, what about plug-in solar panels when they come on the market? Would they work seamlessly with the net new metering system? I would think that they would. And actually, we're working to try to uh, pass legislation in Massachusetts that would enable that pretty soon. And we'll hopefully see the plug-in solar panels pretty soon. So we don't expect that to be an issue. Michael asked a good question. Will the smart meters be able to distinguish the appliance that is drawing the electricity over a given interval? Anna, I think you know the answer to that.
Yeah, so um, the answer is kind of. So the rules around, actually, hold on, let me take one step back. So the smart meter, as we talked about, is the hardware and the software. The software can do really cool things like try to identify which appliance is doing what. So if you remember from one of the early slides, we had an example of what the third-party app Sense that has a partnership with some of the utilities in Massachusetts. What they can show you is it's your AC that's on right now, or oh, we figured out like you just turned the kettle on. It's a lot of smart technology that is figuring out what is on based on the sort of character and pulse of the energy that's being used. So you will get insight through those third-party apps generally in terms of what appliances are doing what. What is unlikely, though, is for that to be used for specific rates for specific end use appliances. So it's unlikely that your smart meter is going to be like, you pay this for your EV, but this for your washing machine and this for your stove, because there are really specific rules around data accuracy for billing. And so it's unless there's like really crazy advances, it's unlikely that we're going to be able to use software to disaggregate what appliances are doing what for billing purposes. But for educational purposes, that's definitely one of the benefits of these, that you'll be able to see how much energy your AC is using, for example, and compare that to like what is the most efficient AC unit out there right now doing, or your fridge. Like, is it time to update your fridge because it's drawing way more energy than a fridge really should? And then you can even calculate how much money would you save based on your past fridge use if you upgraded to a more efficient one. So I hope that answers your question, Michael.
Michael asked, and Tom asked a similar question, which is about it seems like we have to deduce the each appliance's usage right now from the kind of graphs that I was showing, and that is the case for now. But I think the software is going to get better and better. But that issue of being able to have the data applied to billing is a big one that may hold things up a little bit. But we're pretty optimistic that at least in Massachusetts, there's a lot of discussion about how to do this. In Massachusetts, we have a seasonal heat pump rate that's encouraging uh, heat pump adoption. It's not metered to the heat pump. It's if you have a heat pump, your electricity rate is changed, and there'll be some discussions about how do we apply that type of technology specific situation to say EVs into the future. But it's more likely that this is just speculation that when it comes down that we might have time varying rates, it'll be the whole house, as Anna just described, which will still be a huge advancement. And it's about enabling you to control your energy usage, like Tina indicated, what you use when you use it. But this is a huge societal benefit. Something like 40% of our electricity cost in New England are caused by 10% of the hours. And so if we can shave those peaks, we'll all benefit. And that's one of the goals. Am I correct? That's about all the questions that were put in there. So
We're also well past 1 o'clock.
yeah. And so appreciate everyone for bearing with us. I think that if there was one minor weakness in our presentation was on the issue of solar and net metering, and we promise you we're going to find out what we can. But what we encourage you to do is go to the website of your utility and see what they have to say in the meantime. Thank you for joining us.